Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. The horrific death of Kaiser Wilhelm II. In the June of 1941, after spending decades of his life in isolation, Kaiser Wilhelm II, a man who is considered the main warmonger who brought the First World War to Europe, died in the Netherlands. He was a man who had animosity for many countries across Europe, and he also would live to see the Second World War break out across the continent. However, the Nazis, who were now in control of Germany, would consider what to do with the body of the former emperor. But Kaiser Wilhelm II was the last emperor of Germany, and he was a man who built Germany up to become a great power, which resulted in the First World War. But he was a man who was the eldest grandchild of Queen Victoria, the British Queen. He would call the shots following the death of Victoria and dictated that a death mask was to be cast of his grandmother's face against her will. But as mentioned, following the First World War, he would flee Germany and lived out the rest of his life in exile. But what is the story of his death? Kaiser Wilhelm was born on the 27th of January 1859, and he was the eldest child of Crown Prince Frederick of Prussia and Vicky, the daughter of Queen Victoria. His birth was difficult, and he left with a withered arm, which he tried to hide and cover up. But in 1881, following a period of military service, Wilhelm married Augusta Victoria, the Princess of Schleswig-Holstein, and together the couple had 7 children. But in 1888, Wilhelm's father succeeded to the throne as Frederick III, and he died shortly after, meaning that Wilhelm now became the Kaiser of Germany, or the Emperor, at the age of 29. He had admired Otto von Bismarck, and within 2 years he forced his resignation, and he believed that the most important thing for Germany was to build up the armed forces. He looked towards countries such as Britain, and was intensely jealous of their navy and empire, and Wilhelm then expanded the navy and also pursued a policy of aggression with Germans wanting to colonize different countries. He supported the enemies of the British, but following the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914, Wilhelm encouraged the Austrians to take action against Serbia, and he gave them financial backing in the event of war. But Wilhelm was naive, as he did not realise what events would spawn from this, and it eventually resulted in the outbreak of the First World War, which would claim the lives of millions across Europe. In Britain, the people who fought had no idea why they were fighting at times, and Wilhelm's actions brought misery and issues all over Europe. He was, in a sense, excluded from the military hierarchy, and he also at times ruined chances of peace by encouraging the war. He was nothing short of a warmonger, and in 1918 the Americans entered the conflict, and at the time Germany was suffering heavily. They had a lack of men and materials as the years of trench warfare had worn them down, and the German military collapsed. This then brought the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II, as uprising in Berlin took place, and he knew that he would have to give up the imperial crown. He wanted to remain the King of Prussia, however he then agreed to completely abdicate, and on the 10th of November 1918 he crossed the border by train and went into exile in neutral Netherlands. His cousin, King George V of Britain, considered him the greatest criminal in history, and the British Prime Minister wanted Wilhelm executed for his actions. Whilst he was in exile, Wilhelm wrote his memoirs, and for the remaining 20 years of his life he would entertain guests and keep up to date with what was happening in Europe. However, he was seen as the richest man in Germany before his abdication, and he stayed very rich. But in the early 1930s, Wilhelm hoped that the Nazis would bring about the restoration of the monarchy and make his grandson the new Kaiser. Hitler, though, had other ideas, and he blamed Wilhelm for Germany's darkest days, and Wilhelm would invite Nazis to his home, but he would later state of Nazi rule that "We have ceased to live under the rule of law, and everyone must be prepared for the possibility that the Nazis will push their way in and put them up against the wall." He began to become shocked at what was happening in Germany, with Jews being persecuted, and he would admit that he was ashamed to be a German. He wrote of Hitler that there's a man alone, without family, without children, without God. He builds legions, but he doesn't build a nation. A nation is created by families, a religion, traditions. It is made up of the hearts of mothers, the wisdoms of fathers, the joy and the exuberance of children. For a few months I was inclined to believe in National Socialism. I thought of it as a necessary fever, and I was gratified to see that there were associated with it for a time some of the wisest and most outstanding Germans, but these, one by one, he has got rid of or even killed. He has left nothing but a bunch of shirted gangsters. This man could bring home victories to our people each year, without bringing them either glory or danger. But of our Germany, which was a nation of poets and musicians, of artists and soldiers, has made a nation of hysterics and hermits, engulfed in a mob and led by 1,000 liars or fanatics. He did appreciate the military successes of Germany during the start of the Second World War, and he wrote to Hitler saying, "My Führer, I congratulate you and hope that under your marvellous leadership the German monarchy will be restored completely." But the Nazis would literally come to his doorstep, as the Nazi conquest of the Netherlands took place in 1940, and Wilhelm, who was now rather old, retired from public life, and he rejected an offer of asylum from Churchill in Britain to live out the rest of his days at Houston. During his final years he became bitter against the British and also the Jews, and by the June of 1941 he was gravely ill. In the last week of his life, he suffered from what has been classed as an issue with his intestines or his bowels, and at the age of 82 he took to his bed, which would become his deathbed. Despite being severely ill, a few days before his demise, he did rally significantly. His family had been summoned to be by his bedside, but they then left as it looked like he would get better. But during the night of the 4th of June 1941, Wilhelm suffered from a pulmonary embolism in the night, and from this moment he was unconscious. It was said that he never regained consciousness, but his heart still seated. However, at 11:30 a.m. he was then pronounced dead. The only members of his family that were with him when he died were his wife, Hermine, his only daughter, and his grandson. But there was a huge issue regarding the burial of Kaiser Wilhelm II. Hitler at the time wanted to bring the body of the Kaiser back to Berlin so that he could have a state funeral, all whilst the war was going on. But then Hitler realised that this could have been seen as him being the heir to the throne, and he thought this would be useful for propaganda and would make Hitler a figure of royalty. But Kaiser Wilhelm had stated that his body was not to go back to Germany unless the monarchy was restored, and this was respected. The Nazis in the Netherlands agreed for a small funeral to take place, with a few hundred present. The mourners included a number of German field marshals and flying acres from the First World War, as well as military advisers, but Wilhelm, who was at times rather critical of Hitler, had said that he did not want Nazi regalia or the swastika being displayed at his funeral. Hitler completely ignored this, and the funeral was almost a huge Nazi rally with swastikas everywhere, and these wishes were not respected one bit. He was then buried inside of a small mausoleum in the grounds of the house he had spent decades in exile, and today this is considered a place of pilgrimage. Despite his death being quick and over within a number of hours, in his final hours on earth, Kaiser Wilhelm II did suffer. But what is horrific about this is the fact he was a man who was able to live out the rest of his life very comfortably inside of a house in the Netherlands whilst he was responsible for a conflict that ripped millions of men away from their homes and families. There are villages today in Britain who have the names of the First World War dead etched into the sides of their churches, and some villages lost all of the men to a conflict they had no part in. Kaiser Wilhelm's final years of comfortability were a mockery of the suffering and sacrifice of so many during World War I, and he was a man who arguably could have been executed for his role in the conflict. At the end of the Second World War, the main aggressors of the war were brought to trial and were executed inside of an execution chamber. But Kaiser Wilhelm was able to slip away from this world in the comfort of his bedchamber inside of a Dutch palace. He was a man who is considered a reckless leader who plunged the world into some of its darkest days. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.